practices. She is an international leader in the field of RIMS research. Her presentation today is on research information management in the United States. She'll share highlights of her research and discuss the importance of cross-institutional collaboration in RIMS. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bryant. Thank you.
Thanks for that introduction. Let me see if I can share my screen. How's that? Okay, great. Thanks. So as Rebecca said, I'm going to be talking about research information management in the United States. So let me first say a little bit about OCLC, because I'm assuming many of you in this audience may not be familiar with OCLC. OCLC is the Online Computer Library Center. It has been in existence for over 50 years. It's based in the Columbus, Ohio area. And it's a nonprofit cooperative of over 18,000 member libraries worldwide.
Hold on. Oh, it doesn't like it. I was able to download the
hold on, Becky, we can hear you. Or
the
Amy.
Zoom. Yeah, let's see. Join with video. Oh.
Can you hear me?
This is not working. Okay, anyway. So I am in the meeting.
Okay, let me go on a little bit and talk a little bit more about OCLC. So OCLC, your familiarity with OCLC may be primarily through WorldCat, which is the largest aggregation of holdings worldwide, but OCLC also has a number of other products and services. So for the last 40 some years, OCLC has also dedicated resources to research to help scale and accelerate learning, innovation, and collaboration in libraries. And so there's a lot of what we do is to conduct research or do data science investigations and prototypes related to library activities. And so you can go to our website, oc.lc/research here, and take a look at many of the reports that we have related to libraries, linked data, research information management, and etc. So what I'm going to be talking about today are 3 publications that I have presented on since I've been at OCLC for the last 3 or 4 years. I'm going to primarily talk about this first publication here on the left, Research Information Management, Defining RIM in the Library's Role. But I'm also going to draw a little bit from the one on the far right, which is Practices and Patterns in Research Information Management, which was a global survey we conducted with Eurocris. The middle one is also very interesting, but it was a study of European practices and also of the adoption of persistent identifiers. That helps inform our knowledge of the overall landscape and how the US is unique, but I'm not going to be going much into that at this time. So one other thing I'm drawing from is currently unpublished research, and that's some research I've been doing with 2 OCLC colleagues on institutional stakeholders in research support. So my interest is in libraries. My own background is not in libraries. I spent much of my career at the University of Illinois as an assistant dean in the graduate school. I also spent some of my time working for ORCID as community director. And through those experiences, I really understand that libraries are one of the important stakeholders in this landscape. And that increasingly, RIM systems, RDM, ORCID adoption, these are all areas where a lot of stakeholders who may not have worked real closely together are now coming together for enterprise activities. So we've done a number of surveys, a number of interviews with more than 20 informants from across the US to examine this. So we're just wrapping up that. It's going to go into publication later this summer. So watch for that. And some of what I'll be talking about draws from that research as well. So let me first start by talking and defining RIM. RIM is really what we call the aggregation, curation, and utilization of metadata about research activities. I have meta in quotes here because librarians will be very comfortable calling this metadata. For the rest of the campus population, you may be more comfortable just calling it data. It's data. And what do we mean by that? We really mean that it's the publications, the research data, and those sorts of outputs that are about the institution. So that's what I'm defining as research information management. Now, there's a lot of overlapping terms. And in the US landscape in particular, this can be really confusing. So I want to be clear about what I'm putting into this bucket. We're often talking not just about the practice of research information management, but about the systems used. So in Europe, in Australia, sometimes here in the US and Canada, we hear the term current research information system. Really commonly used. In Europe, everybody understands what that means. In the US, we don't use that term much. Instead, we're more commonly, in the last year or so, tend to be using the term RIMS, or Research Information Management System. But we also have a lot of other terms that have been in use that I also think are parts of research information management. RIS, Research Information System, Research Networking System, Research Profiling System, or Researcher Profiling System, Expert Finder System, and also throw into that and talk more about faculty activity reporting, because it is an aggregation, curation, and utilization of metadata about research activities and more. And at the bottom, you see here are a number of different systems along with homegrown solutions that are part of this ecosystem. So again, going back to the metadata, research outputs in the upper right-hand corner, patents, these are the things that are the sort of the meat of what's in a RIM system. But of course, that has to be connected with the researchers, their affiliations, and ideally with their collaborators. Depending upon your system, there may also be systems of statements of impact, usually for external reporting. There may be equipment, grants, and projects. And then additionally, especially if it's used for faculty activity reporting, you may see more things about instructional history, graduate students mentored, services and awards, and more sorts of things there. So there could be a lot of different metadata in a RIM system, but at the core of it, it's going to include research outputs. There are a number of different use cases, and there probably are more than I have in this model. And this model comes from that first position paper that's available through the OCLC website. They vary by region. And so in Europe, we tend to see external research assessment, also in Australia, as being sort of a strong driver. In other places, we see other things like profiles or annual review, or even linkages to a research repository may be the main types of drivers. Reuse is a use case, but usually isn't a driver we observe. And so it can all vary. But what we were trying to do in our research, which I did in collaboration with research library partner members from I think 3 different continents, was that we looked at, tried to develop a model that worked not just for Europe, not just for Australia, but also for North America. And so looking at this, we're trying to have sort of a more uniform view of what research information management might be. Most institutions have more than one use. And so that's really important to keep in mind. And that's going to be sort of a theme that I talk about here a little bit more. I'm offering sort of a big picture view. And so part of what I think is important to note is that research information management is maturing around the world, and especially in the United States, in part because we can now collect this information. And it's really because of the internet, It's really because we now can collect publications metadata at scale, and we can also now at our institutions harvest that metadata at scale. The earliest CRIS systems, beginning in the late 90s in the Netherlands, required people to manually enter all of the publications produced. That still is, there still is some manual entry involved, but so much more of it is, the grand majority of it is about metadata harvesting from sources like PubMed, Scopus, Web of Science, and a variety of other sources. We also have better data because of the adoption of persistent identifiers and the ongoing adoption of DOIs, the growth of ORCID identifiers in the last 7 or 8 years, and also the use of digital sciences grid, or the sort of more open ROR identifier that's beginning to get some traction. So these are all, this is all really important. Now, in other parts of the world, we see external mandates being a strong driver for this, and that accounts for the earlier maturity. The US, less of that. But we still see the forces of globalization, competition, and the ability to collect information that's out on the network and to bring it back to the local institution. So coming back to this, I'm going to go into a little bit more depth about 2 primary use cases and a third that I sort of package not as a RIM driving use case, but that's also sort of a question for you, is if you think that it is, and maybe I need to sort of elevate that in my thinking. The 2 here that are in red are public profiles, expert finder systems, if you will. And the second one I want to talk about is annual academic progress reviews, which is sort of a pretty generic term, and one that works across different countries. But here in the US, we're more likely to call this faculty activity reporting. The one that maybe stands alone is internal reporting or research analytics. I'll talk about that too. So let's talk.
Can I interrupt you just for a moment? I apologize.
Sure.
We're getting a kind of a paper scratching noise. And I think we've decided it's coming from you.
Oh, okay. All right, let me see if maybe putting this up here might help. Maybe my hand's on the counter too, so I'll watch that. So thanks.
All right.
Okay. Okay, let me talk a little bit about the public, what I'm calling here public researcher profiles. Again, sort of circling back to the right side here, we might call these research networking systems, research profiling system, researcher profiling system, expert finder systems. We have a lot of different nomenclature here, and so I'm just going to confuse it further and just call it public researcher profiles. A number of systems in the US, 3 at the bottom here being, in a lot of use to support this use case. But the goals are to support expertise discovery, to enable team science, support collaboration, as well as to help catalyze business and university relationships. So it also can be a way of supporting institutional reputation, demonstrating the prestige of the institution as well. So these are all sort of some of the goals of the public researcher profiles. So here's an example, a non-Florida example, because you're probably more familiar with all the Florida examples. This is Experts at Minnesota, which is managed by one of my collaborators, Jan Franson at the University of Minnesota. Based on Elsevier Pure, previously using SciVal experts, and covers multiple campuses of the University of Minnesota, and includes faculty, researchers, and some graduate students. Primary first starting use case was really as a public profile system, but as many of you may recognize, as you get more maturity with your system, as more people see what the content that's available there, people begin to see other ways that they can reuse that information. So this is an example, and pretty common in the US. We see this, and this indeed, when I was at the University of Illinois, we also implemented Pure for the same purpose. So coming back to the stakeholders, the vice president, vice chancellor for research, research development staff are very keen stakeholders because they want to expose the research and to support collaboration. Also on campus, the library is a stakeholder, campus IT, communicators, and you may also see other stakeholders from the graduate school or academic affairs. Externally, of course, you have business, entrepreneurship, that desire to connect with the university externally as well. So we have a couple quotes that came from our interviews on institutional stakeholders. One, recognizing the importance of collaboration with the Office of Research, with the library, saying, I don't think the campus RIM system would have been as successful as a library-only initiative. It's been absolutely critical that it was backed by the Office of Research, because I think that's also helped keep it to be more of a campus-wide perspective. Other folks have said that their profile system, maybe out of the Office of Research Development, has worked hand in glove with the library to support public profiles. So this is coming from our study of research information management globally. We had around 350 people globally respond to this survey. And what we found was the Office of Research was usually in the lead, the most important stakeholder with the most responsibilities, but the library was second. And this was from institutions responding that they already had a live RIM system or that they were in the process of implementing a RIM system. We also see, though, that they aren't the only two. There are a lot of stakeholders that are involved, which presents opportunities and challenges, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. I'm also wanting to draw a little attention to how the US, even though we had a small sample of US institutions, and so we've lumped here with Canada, but how the way that different stakeholders are involved is really quite different. On the far left with the Netherlands, which has probably the greatest maturity in this space, you see that the library is, in that light blue at the bottom, 50% is the stakeholder, the library is the stakeholder with primary responsibility. A little less, 39% in the US and Canada. But if you go to other national environments like Australia, you see that it's lower, and that the research office is much greater, and that's the same sort of for Italy and also for the UK. So some differences, but we see that the Office of Research, academic units, the library and the research office are often very active in the stakeholder community in the US and Canada. Some other things also drawing from our first report, our position paper, really defining some of the ways that libraries typically are contributing. And this was also backed up in our quantitative study of research information practices through the survey, is that libraries are most likely to play a role in training and support. They have experience with publications metadata and also with, as impact librarians, understanding bibliometrics, alt metrics, and those types of things as well. And one of the things I'll also point out is that the library is probably the only stakeholder on campus that's interested in maintaining and stewarding an institutional record. And so their goals are typically different, perhaps than others on campus, but they're actually also really valuable for maintaining a quality record over time in support of some of the other goals of others on campus, which may be about reporting and exposing their discoverability. I think the discoverability access is one that libraries share very much with the other stakeholders on campus, is to expose the university's research and also then to help connect people with other people they may conduct research with in the future. So let me stop there and see if there are any questions before I move on to the second use case I want to talk a little more about.
So folks, let's see, we do have a Q&A. That is not an actual question. So I'm going to just, has anybody raised their hand to ask a question?
We can can just keep going on. Thought it seemed like a good moment maybe to pause. So I'll just go on, okay? And start talking about use case number 2, which is faculty activity reporting. And again, there are numerous use cases, but this is one that we're observing that is growing in the US. Again, mixed nomenclature. The one I find most common is faculty activity reporting here in the US. It may also be annual academic progress reviews, excuse me, faculty information system, faculty report of professional activities. Your campus may have its own 3 or 4 letter acronym. But the goal really is, or goals are to support the workflow for annually collecting the research, teaching, and service activities of university faculty. So it's, but it's also a way to aggregate information for reuse. That reuse might be updating web pages. It's also likely to be decision support, having a better idea of the institution's research outputs. The data may also be reused for academic review academic program review or accreditation, or maybe even be available so that faculty can do less data reentry for promotion and tenure dossiers. So here's an example from the University of Colorado at Boulder. And they use symplectic elements for their FAR workflow. And then they also have a public profile system on top of that using Vivo. So they actually have both use cases here, among others. And the data then is used to support updates of web pages, some reporting related to grants or preparation of content for grant reporting. And it's also used by communications officers for media requests so that they can understand what expertise is on campus for those things. A number of products in this category. In the room space, we're most familiar with Clarivate's, Converis, and Elements. But also there are a couple here that are worth mentioning. Interfolio is widely used, formerly Faculty 180. And then we also see a lot of institutions that are using or have used digital measures. So key stakeholders here, this list looks a little different. And it's primarily the provost office, academic affairs units, faculty affairs units, maybe going back up to the provost office, IT. I think the library is also a stakeholder, but probably less involved in this use case in many cases. But then a lot of other stakeholders, HR, the enterprise data warehouse folks, grad school, they want to use a similar process, registrar because there's student information, lots of stakeholders as well. And because there can be a lot of stakeholders, there also may be duplication in this space. In one of our interviews, we talked with somebody at a Big Ten institution who said, we have 6 or 7 research profiling systems on our campus. That's a duplication of service for sure. And part of this is recognizing that while I would classify all of these as different types of RIM systems in the US, the public profiles, the FAR systems are often still largely separate, but also we may have the implementation of FAR systems just at the college or the department level. And we're definitely not yet to the point where we've enter once and reuse often. We also still have the challenge that at many institutions, the data often can't be aggregated for a consistent enterprise level view. Even if all of these different units may be collecting their information, it may also not be fully interoperable. So here's moving on to my third use case, and that's research analytics. I think it is a driver, but I also think that it's a category that sort of deserves to stand on its own. It's also more than the RIM system, which is usually why I sort of separate it out. Folks on attending this webinar are probably really familiar with this as well, because it's really the aggregation in content from both internal and external sources to really understand the research footprint, the research strengths for decision support. it may draw information from the RIM system, but it's also likely to draw from other sources like Dimensions or Scopus, use data analysis and visualization, and support competitive analysis, citation maps, co-authorship networks, much like the webinar we saw yesterday. And there's a lot of movement we also see in this area to support this related to centralization of data analytics offices, campus data governance committees, development of data lakes to support, greater access and usability of content. In the course of our interviews, talking with folks, they expressed a lot of frustration with their ability to conduct research. So much of it they describe as ad hoc. And one person from a research, Office of Research said, when we asked her if she could wave a magic wand and she would have anything, she said, data. I'd have data at my fingertips. Another person also said that their Office of Research really wants push button reporting, but that it's really very difficult at this point. So I think this is a very interesting, exciting area of growth in our universities. We did a case study here in the box at the bottom, where with with Virginia Tech Libraries, who in the course of a visit I had with their campus last fall, I learned about some of the interesting things they're doing with research analytics. So we had a discussion with our research library partner members, and also summarize this into this blog post at that link below. I think it's pretty meaty, and I'd encourage you to take a look at it. So I mentioned interoperability before. Certainly we need improved technical interoperability, but I also think we need improved social interoperability within our institutions. Let's talk about technical interoperability first. I mentioned this before, institutions struggle to aggregate content from a lot of their different systems. This was my experience working with Pure at Illinois. There was some content that I knew that we collected in our HR processes, but because we began collecting it that way, maybe 10 years before, we didn't think about how we might wanted to have it fielded. So the data was not fit for purpose. For instance, I think the case in point here is that we collected information about education attainment, degrees awarded, where did you get your PhD from? But because it wasn't fielded in any sort of way, it was really not fit for purpose. It was more difficult for us to import into our system. One of our informants in our study of institutional stakeholders said that the university president at their institution was appalled at the difficulty of understanding institutional research strengths in a data-rich way. And part of it really was coming from the fact that a lot of their data was not fit for purpose. It was very difficult to aggregate. Moving on to the social, is that this is where a lot of our duplication of effort, many different systems as opposed to sort of one or just two maybe across the institutions. But also individuals and units don't know how their knowledge and data can possibly work together. So I think there's a lot of work to be done here. Again, one of our informants said there just needs to be the human touch and coordination behind the scenes to make sure that all the units are working together in the way that they should, and that all the efforts are strategically aligned. So in both of these areas, I think we have a lot of opportunity for growth and greater maturity in the US. So I'm going to be winding down. So if you have questions, I would encourage you to go ahead and put them in chat, and then we can have a discussion in probably the last 20 minutes or so. I want to talk about some other things about the US and why it's a little distinctive. And this is again drawing from these two research reports I mentioned earlier, but specifically from this one's Practices and Patterns in Research Information Management. This was an effort that we conducted along with Eurocris, which is a nonprofit organization based in Europe, based in the Netherlands, that for about 15 or more years has been working to pull together the community related to CRIS systems in Europe and worldwide, and also to look at and supporting standards and data formats. And so we had a team from Europe and the United States, as well as from OCLC, working on this project so that we could have a global survey. We had 381 survey respondents from 44 countries, the majority of them from Europe, many of them from the Americas. A lot of them were unknown. We were dealing with the implementation of GDPR in Europe, and we were kind of careful. We were maybe overly careful, but not by not requiring people to say their country, and a lot of them didn't. So that's part of one of the challenges we have with our data set. But what we can see is that across the board, reporting and compliance drive RIM adoption. And you can see that, in the top bar, the most folks reporting extremely important is managing annual academic reporting. Supporting compliance is also really high. So these are some of the things that are sort of most important. You can also see, looking down here next to the bottom, is that supporting expertise discovery on a global scale is not as important as some of the other things above. So looking just at external research assessment, look at the UK with their research framework for assessing research among their research university libraries. The ref, super high also in Australia and then in these other countries. And the US, we're just operating in a different environment. But one of the things that's interesting is that we're often still using a lot of the same vendor products like Pure and Elements that come from this sort of research assessment environment. Institutions in the Netherlands, Australia, other parts of Europe, think that having sort of a registry that holds all of the research outputs of the institution is really important, super important. In fact, 100% important in the Netherlands. When we come to the US and Canada, I think we have more of an approach that the content, especially in our public profiles, only really needs to be good enough. We don't have to chase down every single publication because our funding isn't dependent upon us getting that, like we see in some national environments, like Finland. And while globally that expertise discovery isn't a primary use case, when we look at the United States, it's much, much higher than it is in, again, looking in comparison to some other countries. So this helps to, to sort of distinguish some of the things that are specific for us. Here's some of the references I used. And from here, I would enjoy having a discussion about what I presented and about what you're doing at your institution.
All right, so we do have, I'm Becky. If we're going to ask you to start your video and unmute. I'm just gonna, she's gonna ask the questions, but I'm also gonna start opening up the, allowing other people to speak so that they can ask their questions directly. Caroline, so Becky, Caroline has posted a question. You're still muted.
I know. Thank
There
you. Can you hear me now? I couldn't unmute it. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, you're unmuted.
So the question is, I'm glad you addressed the social aspect. Being able to collect data seems to often be directly proportional to the underlying social desire to engage, to be connected. Is that aligned with your observations?
Could you repeat the question to make sure I understand it?
Okay. Being able to collect data seems to often be directly proportional to the underlying social desire to engage. I think it's to be connected. It says engage, be connected. Is that aligned with your observations?
Wow,
The
that's
social
interesting.
desire to engage and be connected, probably. That's what that is.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think that that's a question that we've really asked in the course of our research. We've spent a lot of our time looking at a model from William Rouse. I actually have his book right here called Universities as Complex Enterprises, which I really recommend. Here's the cover. And I found this actually really useful because he's a former university administrator, and he's also an engineer and systems expert. So he sort of applied all the things that he knows about understanding why universities are complex places to work. And that's part of what we've sort of drawn out with in our research is that, yeah, certainly there are folks who really do want to connect and work together, but we also have institutions where we're able to work really as free agents, as intelligent free agents. There's no sort of top-down hierarchy. I mean, there sort of is, but everybody is still pretty free to do their own thing. I find all of these explanations of universities as complex adaptive systems as really useful for understanding why social interoperability can be so hard for us. And I think that understanding that system is going to go a long way for us making more connections. The other thing I think is probable is that the COVID-19 may accelerate some of those things. I don't know if anybody else sort of thinks that, but yeah.
This is Carol Ann. I was just thinking that, Rebecca, that this experience we're all having being so isolated from each other, it will really be interesting to look back in a year or so and maybe see if there is evidence that this has changed how we view the opportunities we have to interact with each other, and are we more willing and eager to do that? I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you, actually. Our research was all conducted, we'd wrapped up our last interview in the middle of February, late February. So all of our interviews for that study were conducted pre-COVID impact, shall we say. And so at this point, I can only speculate how that changed. But I kind of think you're right, that we're likely, I mean, I'm pretty hungry for going back to the office, as are you. And I think we may.
Well, I got a message saying to unmute my mic, so
Hey,
I don't know.
so yeah, so if you're sorry, if you're I allowed everybody the opportunity to talk, but if you're not talking, if you please mute your mic while other people are talking, just so we don't hear the background noise. Sorry, Rebecca.
That's okay. Are there any other questions?
This is Carol Ann again. I do have one more question if somebody else doesn't have one to jump in on. I'm just curious if anywhere in all the assessments and studies analysis of these types of expert systems, has anyone looked at I'll use the word bureaucracy or barriers within an institution to be able to act on a desire to engage and collaborate, cross-discipline, cross-department, all that, and where that all fits in here? That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. My sense is that we tend to focus a lot on the technical. And the technical is not easy, but I think that the social is harder. And so that's really why we're sort of doing this study now. I'm sure there is some in the literature, but there's much more sort of generally I found about libraries working with other units on campus and sort of in broad ways. I think often the literature in our different areas doesn't always intersect. as well. I can't off the top of my head point to anything directly. So I think that that's a gap that we're interested in filling at OCLC Research.
I could see where the data would bring it to light,
Mhm.
though, too. Thank you, Rebecca. It's been a
Sure.
fascinating presentation. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, David, I see you have your hand raised. You want to ask your question?
Yes, hi, good morning, Rebecca. Thanks for the presentation. It's definitely excellent, and I think it confirms some of our own experiences at FIU in terms of collaboration between the different offices. I'm coming from the Office of Research within FIU, and I'm curious how your perspective on science CV and how this could, at the federal level, impact the environment at, federally, in terms of how much institutions will start adopting this within the research office as an initiative.
And David, can you also say a little bit about what the new mandate is? Because I think you can talk about it better than I can.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So on June 1st, the NSF is going to start to require biosketches generated from Science CV, and Science CV integrates with ORCID. So I know that within our research office, in our university, we're strategizing on what we will tell our faculty members so that they get their data to the right places. And I think from a federal standpoint, from what I've gathered, recommending people go to ORCID is a key component of that. So I was just curious if you've seen that resonate, that topic, recently amongst the research offices in the U.S.
I don't know so much about research offices. I know I saw a presentation through the ORCID US community hosted by Lyrasis. So you could just if you aren't already familiar with that community, there's a lot of resources about ORCID adoption there. And I believe there was a presentation from North Carolina State University that I saw recently about how they're preparing. I think they have integration. I don't remember which system they have integration with, but they've also been doing a lot of outreach. Libraries are generally fans of ORCID and other persistent identifiers. I can also speak a little bit from my past experience working at ORCID, was that this is exactly the sort of thing that you're looking at to really drive national adoption. I've seen this in other national environments early on, like 2013, we saw a requirement for ORCID integration with other systems in Portugal. And they basically, it means that, and there's only one funding agency because it's a much smaller country. So it happens much faster than in the US with multiple funding organizations. But this is really going to mean a lot more ORCID adoption of faculty with NSF funding. I'm assuming the same thing because Science CV was also originally developed by NIH, that the same thing may sort of follow with NIH, or at least it's already been strongly recommended. So I also think that may mean that our institutions want to not only promote this to our researchers, but also begin to think about how we can use this coming back for our systems. Can we integrate with our campus directories? Can we use that to feed into our CRIS systems, our RIM systems? And as far as the Office of Research, I think a general observation I have, and this again sort of comes from my experience working with ORCID, was that libraries were keenly aware of ORCID very early, but that research offices were slower. And not because, but only because it wasn't their knowledge expertise up front, because they aren't experts in publications metadata. They aren't worrying about importing information from different systems or making it available. They're users of information, but how that gets to them, that's not their wheelhouse. So a lot of it is about just that growing familiarity with ORCID and how it can improve not only information for NSF, but also the opportunities for it to improve and simplify our systems, disambiguate our data for for our RIM systems with less manual intervention. That's a win-win for everybody. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but
No,
maybe
no,
it's
I
some
think,
new things.
yeah, I think that that is definitely a great answer, and it confirms some, I think the direction that's probably heading. Once the funders start requiring it, I think we should see a big uptick. Maybe a little bit painful in the beginning, but
Yeah, yeah,
thank you.
sure.
Okay, we have a question from Alvin Lee. Most of our library's budgets cannot cover the costs of RIM systems. Do you have any advice on getting other departments on campus to partner in covering the cost?
I think that the report we have coming out will be useful for you. We don't address that specifically, but in in a very general sense, we've interviewed people at institutions where maybe the Office of Research covers the costs for the system and the 1 FTE that the library has. And it's because both units saw the value of that. And so I think that part of it is then understanding and honing your message about what problem does another unit, the Office of Research, or maybe even research development folks within that unit, what problems do they have? And I think that as I talked about this, there are a lot of different goals that these systems can help us address. And the one that seems most powerful for the Office of Research is team science, bringing in more research dollars, being able to demonstrate that, increase collaboration, maybe even increase more collaboration on campus so that more of the dollars stay locally. Those all may be the types of things that can help with that. So I wish you luck, because we've heard this from multiple folks in the course of the research I've been doing for the last 4 years, is that generally, if this is a library-only initiative, it's far less successful than if it's a cross-campus initiative.
Alvin, if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to go ahead and ask those. So, Amy, can you see if someone else has raised their hand?
No, I don't have anybody else who raised their hand. Anyone else wish to ask a question? You can speak directly or raise your hand or post a text question. So I'm not getting any. I guess that's it.
All right.
So, Rebecca, you probably covered this, but just to ask, out of our 50 states, how many of those have at least one institution that is doing a REMS or faculty type system?
I can't answer that. I don't have
Okay.
data on that. I would
Sorry.
guess, I would guess, it's speculative, but I would guess that you would find one in every state. And also, there are a lot of things I consider as a RIM system that aren't, if an institution is maintaining some sort of bibliography of its campus, it might be an Excel spreadsheet. I think they're doing a form of research information management. So that they aren't able to reuse it.
Right.
It's very limited, but it shows the desire to maintain that institutional record in some way. And we do, actually, I've seen that among small liberal arts colleges. So I think it's reasonable to say that most states are involved. But again, this is a practice where only large research institutions are usually implementing resources.
Right.
But the other thing I'll say is that you look at systems like digital measures or Interfolio's faculty activity reporting module, and you see lots of smaller institutions using those workflows. So they also then have data that potentially can be reused in other ways. And I think in time also be used and I think Digital Measures already does this, can populate some sort of profiles. So I think it's very widespread. Yeah, very widespread, but still
Okay.
without a lot of, we're still having problems with the technical interoperability, so that our ability to use this information building on legacy data is still not as mature as it will be. It's coming.
Right, right. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to share today.
Well, thank you for your time. I think everybody's found this to be very valuable, and requests have started coming through in chat, people who would like your slides, and of course we're recording your presentation, or recorded it, so we can share that as well. But
Great.
very, very interesting and very valuable. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.